that position. And because of what's missing from her, that she...
Sydney Loofe wasn't the kind of person who took wild chances. She was soft-spoken, gentle and thoughtful, more comfortable with quiet evenings than late-night parties. Friends described her as grounded, steady, a young woman who found joy in small things, tending to her cat, texting her mom, or flipping through thrift store books on her days off. At just 24, she was carving out her own life in Lincoln, Nebraska. She worked at a hardware retail store, smiled politely at strangers, and always showed up on time. But even the kindest hearts long for connection. And for Sydney, that meant turning to an app, a digital space where so many people, just like her, were searching for something more. When she matched with someone new, someone who seemed kind, it felt like a small spark in the right direction. They laughed. They shared stories. Plans were made. And then, one night in November, she stepped out into the cool, dark air, dressed casually, cheeks slightly flushed, ready for a second date. She locked her door behind her. She didn't know she wouldn't return. Born in 1993, Sydney Loofe grew up in the heart of the Midwest, Lincoln, Nebraska, a place where families know their neighbors and life moves at a softer pace. She was raised in a loving home, the kind where birthdays were celebrated with homemade cake, and quiet conversations stretched long after dinner. Sydney was the youngest child, cherished by her parents, known for her gentle nature and unshakable kindness. She lived modestly, renting a small apartment not far from her job at Menards, a home improvement store where coworkers described her as dependable and thoughtful. Animals brought her peace, especially her cat, Nimsy, who often curled up beside her after work. Outside of work, she stayed mostly to herself. But like many her age, Sydney turned to Tinder, not for fun, but for connection, for someone to talk to, for someone real. She believed good people were still out there, somewhere. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Sydney's online presence was light, hopeful, and full of quiet optimism. Her Instagram feed featured snapshots of blooming wildflowers, cozy corners of her apartment, and the soft fur of her beloved cat. She wasn't flashy or attention-seeking, just someone who found beauty in the small, overlooked moments of everyday life. Friends noticed something different about her that week. Her smile seemed easier, her energy lighter. She posted a quote about new beginnings, liked more photos than usual, and added soft filters to her selfies. There was something in her eyes, a quiet anticipation, like someone preparing to let a new chapter begin. She didn't share names or details. Just a few emojis, a subtle caption here and there, but the message was clear. Sydney was feeling hopeful, maybe even excited. And for the first time in a while, she was starting to believe in someone. On November 14th, 2017, Sydney's phone lit up with a notification from Tinder. It was a match, Bailey, a young woman with warm brown eyes and a quick, easy smile. Her bio was inviting, her messages polite, even witty. Sydney responded, cautiously at first, then more openly as the exchange unfolded. Their conversation had a natural rhythm, free of awkward tension or red flags. That same evening, they agreed to meet. Sydney didn't tell many people, but she did mention to one close friend that she was going out. She wore her favorite hoodie, tied her hair up casually, and slipped on sneakers, just a low-pressure, low-key first meet. When she came home later that night, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She didn't seem shaken. In fact, she seemed light, relaxed, maybe even quietly thrilled. The next day, November 15th, Sydney worked her usual shift. She joked with coworkers. She laughed at a meme someone texted her on break. She didn't say much, but her energy was different. At lunch, she mentioned she had a second date planned. Her tone wasn't dramatic or showy. It was hopeful, private. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the quiet Nebraska horizon, she snapped a quick selfie in soft lighting. Her blonde hair was brushed neatly over one shoulder, and a warm flush colored her cheeks. She posted it to Snapchat with the caption, "Ready for my date tonight." Just 4 words, 1 emoji, a digital moment, passing and beautiful. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She didn't share a location. Maybe she didn't feel the need to. It wasn't reckless, just trusting. It felt like the beginning of something. Then, around 7:30 p.m., her phone activity stopped. No texts, no calls, no social media updates. Her friends tried reaching out later that night, but got no reply. Her mother sent a goodnight message. No response. From that moment, Sydney Loofe's voice went quiet. Her digital trail faded into static. The town of Lincoln slept peacefully that night, unaware that something, or someone, had quietly crossed a line. And for those who loved her, the silence would soon become unbearable. The house in Wilbur, Nebraska sat quiet on the outside. Just another nondescript rental tucked into a sleepy street. But on the inside, it was something else entirely. By the time Sydney stepped through the front door, Bailey Boswell was no longer just a Tinder match. She was something else, a lure. And waiting behind her was Aubrey Trail, 51, with eyes that didn't smile and a presence that swallowed the room. Inside, the lighting was dim. There were no signs of violence, no raised voices. At least, not at first. Sydney likely didn't sense anything wrong. She may have even sat down, chatted, looked around, tried to be polite. But the air had already changed. The warmth in Bailey's tone was fading. The closeness between her and Aubrey no longer seemed platonic. The trap had already closed. According to Trail's later confession, Sydney was restrained, her movement controlled, her voice likely silenced. Then, without warning or mercy, she was strangled. Whether by hand or with a cord, the act was brutal, prolonged, and cold. She had no chance to fight back, no time to scream, no one to hear her if she had. There were no marks of hesitation, no signs of panic afterward. What followed was not the chaos of fear, but the calm of something planned. The tools were already there. A handsaw, utility knives, heavy-duty trash bags. Trail and Boswell cut her body apart, working in segments. The bathroom was wiped clean between each step. The pieces were sealed, double-bagged, and loaded into a vehicle. It didn't happen in a rush. It happened with silence, intention. Later, when asked why, Trail said something that froze every room it was repeated in. She didn't follow our rules. It had to be done. There was no apology in his voice, no confusion, just cold self-justification, like a man describing a task completed. And Bailey? She said nothing. She didn't scream. She didn't stop him. She stayed. By dawn, Sydney was gone, not just from that house, but from the world. And the people who ended her life simply cleaned up and drove off into the plains like nothing had happened. When Sydney failed to show up for work on the morning of November 16th, her absence triggered instant alarm. She wasn't the kind of person who disappeared. She was consistent, reliable, rooted in quiet routine. Calls went unanswered. Texts remained unread. Her family tried again, then again. But the silence felt heavier than usual. A silence that didn't make sense. By that evening, her parents filed a missing person report. Local law enforcement began by searching her apartment. The door was locked. Her car sat parked outside, untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, no damage, no blood. Her cat, Nimsy, meowed softly from a corner. Nothing looked out of place. But everything felt wrong. The hours turned into days. Her phone had gone dark. No GPS signals, no app activity, no financial transactions. She hadn't run away. She hadn't left voluntarily. Something else had happened. As the investigation deepened, officers began retracing Sydney's last movements. A digital footprint led them to a familiar app, Tinder. And from there, to the name Bailey Boswell. Bailey's profile had already been deleted. Her phone was off. She and her boyfriend, Aubrey Trail, had vanished. The case was no longer just a missing person alert. It was turning into something else. Something colder, deeper, more sinister. Detectives scoured highways, rest stops, ditches. Search dogs combed wooded areas outside Lincoln. Volunteers posted flyers, shared Sydney's photo online. The community held its breath, hoping for a miracle. But on December 4th, that hope was shattered. A highway crew working near a remote stretch of road in Clay County, nearly 90 miles from Wilbur, spotted something unusual. A heavy black trash bag, torn open, with something pale exposed beneath layers of plastic. Local deputies were called in. One bag became 2, then 3. The scene was quiet. The earth frozen. The sky gray. And scattered beneath the brittle grass were the dismembered remains of a young woman. Investigators moved carefully. Gloves, evidence markers, photographs. A perimeter was secured, and the entire area was treated as a major crime scene. The smell of bleach lingered faintly inside one of the bags. The method of disposal was calculated. No identifiers, no clothes, no wallet, no phone, just parts. Isolated, detached. As if someone had wanted her, not only gone, but erased. It took days to confirm what the heart already knew. The remains belonged to Sydney Loofe. Back in Lincoln, her mother sat in the living room, still texting her daughter's number, still hoping it might ring. But now, there would be no more replies, only questions, and a burning need for justice. The small rental home in Wilbur, Nebraska, where Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail had been staying, appeared ordinary from the outside. Blinds drawn, a dusty porch, a rusted mailbox. But once investigators stepped through the threshold, they quickly realized the silence was deceptive. The floor had been scrubbed. A faint chemical smell still lingered in the air. Bleach, ammonia, and something else more acrid, more permanent. The bathroom tiles shone unnaturally white, but under the forensic lights, luminol glowed along the edges of the tub, along baseboards, beneath the vinyl flooring. Blood had seeped deep, beyond what soap and elbow grease could reach. In a closet, tucked inside a storage bin, investigators found a handsaw with traces of biological tissue still lodged in its teeth. Next to it, a set of utility knives, one blade snapped in half. Nearby, rolls of plastic sheeting, several open trash bags identical to those found in Clay County, and latex gloves, half-used. The cleaning had been thorough, but not perfect. The evidence spoke louder than the silence. It told a story of intent, not panic. Back at the state forensic lab, the autopsy began. Pathologists worked quietly under harsh white light, piecing together what could be reassembled. Sydney's body had been dismembered with precision, joints separated cleanly, cuts made with a practiced hand. But it was her neck that revealed the most important truth. The hyoid bone was fractured. A small horseshoe-shaped bone in the neck, often left intact, except in cases of manual strangulation. There were no marks on her wrists, no bruises on her arms, no signs of a struggle. Sydney hadn't fought. She hadn't had the chance. Pathologists noted this detail with heavy hearts. Whatever happened in that house, it had come suddenly, decisively. She had likely been ambushed, controlled, and silenced before she even knew what was happening. There was no peace in the remains. Only evidence. Only questions. And beneath the cold, clinical surface of every test, every photograph, and every vial collected, there was one shared realization among the forensic team. Sydney Loofe never had a moment to scream. In the hours after Sydney Loofe was officially declared missing, detectives began tracing her digital footprint. Every app she opened, every message she sent, every ping from her phone. The name Bailey Boswell surfaced quickly. Sydney's last known communications were with her on Tinder, and the match was recent, just days before she disappeared. The deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the picture became. Bailey's Tinder profile had been deleted shortly after Sydney vanished. Her phone had gone dark. Neighbors reported seeing Bailey and her boyfriend, Aubrey Trail, hastily loading a car late at night, then disappearing. Surveillance footage placed the couple in a Walmart, buying bleach, trash bags, and tools, items that would later be linked to the disposal of Sydney's body. Law enforcement issued a bulletin and began tracking the pair's vehicle across state lines. Their trail was erratic, cheap motels, gas stations, back roads, as if they were trying to stay just ahead of something. Then came something no one expected. A video appeared online. Bailey and Aubrey, sitting together in a car, facing the camera. Bailey looked exhausted. Aubrey looked defiant. His voice was steady as he spoke.
Good morning, Lincoln and Omaha and probably several other places. This is Aubrey Trail and this is Bailey Boswell. I guess y'all also.
We haven't done anything wrong, but we know Sydney is dead. The video went viral. The public was stunned. No remorse, no grief. Just two people calmly discussing a dead woman on camera, as if it were a misunderstanding. But the data told a different story. Digital forensics recovered GPS logs from both Bailey and Trail's phones. Waltz, the coordinates matched perfectly with the remote area in Clay County where Sydney's remains were found. Timestamps placed them at the scene within hours of her disappearance. Cell tower triangulation showed their movements from Lincoln to Wilbur to the outskirts of town. Traffic cameras placed their vehicle on rural roads at night, and inside the car, when it was eventually recovered, investigators found traces of bleach, soil samples, and a few strands of Sydney's blonde hair wedged into the crevice of a seat. Warrants were secured. Witnesses were interviewed. A timeline was assembled. Piece by piece, the truth was reconstructing itself. Not through words, but through data. A digital trail too precise to erase. And the more police uncovered, the more it became clear. Bailey and Aubrey hadn't just crossed a line. They had planned to. What began as a missing persons case had now become a coordinated, evidence-driven homicide investigation, with 2 suspects under the lens and a state ready to demand answers. After weeks on the move, Bailey Boswell was finally located and brought in. She didn't resist. She didn't weep. Her face was composed, her voice soft. During the first round of questioning, she maintained her calm.
Okay, his house?
Maybe somewhere like, the dog store.
She described herself as a bystander, present but powerless, someone caught in the orbit of something she couldn't control. Her story was vague. She couldn't recall times. She claimed not to know Sydney's last movements. She refused to answer questions about the tools found in her apartment or the bleach-heavy cleaning spree. But police already had what they needed. Bailey's phone pinged at the precise location where Sydney's remains were discovered. She had been there, not once but multiple times, according to GPS logs. Surveillance footage showed her buying the same type of trash bags used to dispose of the body. And inside the vehicle she'd shared with Trail, fibers from Sydney's clothing were recovered. Then came Aubrey Trail. Unlike Bailey, Trail walked into his interviews with the intensity of a man who wanted to control the narrative. He shifted in his chair, stared at the walls, smirked between sentences, and then, without flinching, he made his confession. "Yes, I killed her," he said. "But it wasn't murder. She broke the rules." The detective sat still. Trail began describing a bizarre system of laws he claimed Sydney had violated. He spoke of a secret group, of power, of submission. "I'm not who you think I am," he told them. "I'm a vampire, a sorcerer." She knew the risks. To the investigators, it sounded less like a confession and more like performance art soaked in delusion. But what mattered wasn't the fantasy. It was the fact that he'd placed himself at the scene, admitted to the act, and linked Bailey by calling her his second. Bailey, meanwhile, kept her story intact. "I didn't touch her. I didn't kill anyone. I was just there." But digital records said otherwise. Text messages, search history, her proximity to the tools, the recorded video they both willingly posted online. The evidence wrapped around them like a noose. Neither of them expected how loudly the quiet data would speak. Neither of them understood how deep the digital truth would cut through their lies. In the interrogation rooms, where silence and tension hung thick in the air, 2 different stories would hold, but only one would hold up in court. The case file was massive, a meticulously built wall of evidence stacked against Bailey Boswell and Aubrey Trail. What began as a missing persons report had grown into a dense portfolio of digital trails, forensics, behavioral patterns, and hard physical proof. Prosecutors opened with DNA. Sydney's blood was found on the bathroom floorboards beneath newly installed laminate. Her hair, light distinct, was recovered from the car seats and the handsaw stored under a laundry basket in the Wilbur house. The garbage bags that once held her remains were the same brand, from the same batch, purchased on a Walmart run caught on surveillance just days before the murder. Then came the GPS logs. Trails and Boswell's cell phones were tracked along precise routes, from Lincoln to Wilbur, then west into Clay County, near the exact sites where Sydney's remains were later discovered. The phones paused for several minutes in isolated roadside clearings, just long enough to dump a body. Search history chilled the courtroom. How to get rid of a body. Bleach versus hydrogen peroxide cleaning blood. What dissolves tissue fastest? Can you trace a body without fingerprints? The prosecution read each phrase slowly. No commentary, no embellishment. The silence that followed each question was more damning than any accusation. Multiple witnesses described the couple's strange behavior in the days following Sydney's disappearance. Going on antique shopping trips, acting oddly calm, even joking about being on the news. And then there was the video, the one they posted online, nonchalantly confirming Sydney was dead, while denying involvement. When Aubrey Trail took the stand, he shifted again, no longer claiming to be a vampire or a cult leader, but instead attempting to take sole responsibility. Bailey didn't kill her, he said. It was me. I snapped. But the jury had already seen too much. The narrative had collapsed under the weight of the facts. In June 2021, Trail was sentenced to death. The judge described the crime as cold, calculated, and monstrous. Later that year, Bailey Boswell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, making her the first woman in nearly a century in Nebraska to receive such a sentence. She didn't speak at her sentencing. She simply stood, motionless, head bowed, as the gavel dropped. Outside the courthouse, Sydney's family embraced quietly. There were no cheers, no closure, only a strange kind of stillness, a long-awaited breath that didn't feel like victory. Justice had spoken, but nothing, not even a verdict carved in stone, could bring Sydney back. She was only 24 years old. 24 years old. 24 years old. Sydney Loofe didn't lead a reckless life. She wasn't chasing thrills or taking wild risks. She was simply a young woman trying to connect, trying to find warmth and kindness in a world that too often feels cold. And for that, she paid with her life. Her family didn't just lose a daughter, they lost her laugh, her texts at midnight, her favorite coffee orders, her future. There's a kind of grief that never fully speaks. And this was it. A silence deeper than any court ruling. A pain that lingers in the spaces she used to fill. What happened to Sydney is more than a crime. It's a reckoning. A mirror held up to the dark edge of modern connection. The way technology has brought us closer and yet left us more vulnerable than ever. Apps like Tinder are designed to make introductions easy. But they can't read intentions. They don't warn you when someone's smile is a lie. They don't send an alert when a date turns into something unthinkable. So let this be a warning, not a story. Always tell someone where you're going. Never meet a stranger alone, especially in private. And above all, trust your instincts, even when the screen says you've matched. Sydney didn't do anything wrong. But those who hurt her were counting on her trust. And that trust, so pure, so human, was used against her. She will not return, but her story doesn't disappear. It echoes. It cautions. It saves, if we let it. Because sometimes, the most powerful voices are the ones who are no longer here to speak.